Okay, welcome to this short introduction to energyPRO. I'm actually going to cover the whole family of products in the energyPRO range. So there's energyPRO itself, energyCHECK, and energyTRADE. So what's the difference? energyPRO is really about designing an energy system. It originally began its life as CHP design and was, as the name suggests, was all about CHP, but subsequently has developed into being able to model any energy system from a country to an individual building. So it's a very flexible product and can model pretty much anything. energyCHECK it uses the same underlying algorithm, but is read-only. So it reads from your plant and provides a window into the operation of the plant and allows you to compare it to an ideal operation of that plant based on an energyPRO model. energyTRADE is both read and write. So energyTRADE allows you to read what your plant is doing, but also to write back to the plant to control what it does. So, and as the name suggests, the trade is about allowing you to trade in electricity markets. So you can actually place bids into the day-ahead market, and once you've secured those bids, you can then control the plants to operate as you've bid. Okay, let's now move on to the software itself. So this is energyPRO, and this is a project I've obviously prepared in advance of this. You can see here on this graphical interface we've added a couple of boilers of just under 1 megawatt each. We've got a fuel, natural gas, we've got a heat demand, electricity demand, which is supplied by an electricity market in London. And we could actually, over here, we can see there are lots more inputs. You can see I've got various prices and incentives and taxes and indeed some capital investments here. So you can model pretty much any financial arrangements that you might need, as well as if we looked here, you'd be able to see we can add lots of different types of energy conversion unit, from boilers as we've got here to CHP, types of chiller, renewable systems, heat pumps, solar thermal, photovoltaics, wind farm, and rejection, types of rejection, so you might be rejecting heat potentially, and storage, thermal storage, cold stores, even batteries, even hydro pumping, and electric vehicles in a sort of V2G mode. And then we can model heating, cooling, and electricity demands and electricity markets, either spot markets or fixed tariff markets. So there's plenty of flexibility there to add different systems, and indeed there are more options. You can in fact add process heat demands as well. You can have you can create fuels and have units that use fuels, so you can model electrolysis and hydrogen and so on. So pretty much anything is possible. You can see also that we've got CO2 emission factors here, which are specific UK ones. So you can set up your own emission factors for gas and electricity, whatever you've got in your project. So let's have a look at when I run this simulation. Then you'll see we've got we can see our heat demand. So this is an hourly simulation. You can see boilers. The boiler 1 is supplying the heat demand most of the time. Down the bottom we've got an electricity demand which is varying. This is a week We happen to be in May here. We could zoom around in the whole year and look at January. We could look at the whole year as one. And at the top you can see we've got a net production cost graphic, which is essentially calculating in every time step the cost of using that, of dispatching that particular unit. And in this case we only have boilers, so it's rather simple. So this is a compare project. What I mean by that is it relies on the compare module in energyPRO. So in fact we've got multiple tabs down here along the bottom. So you can see I've created projects with variants of this initial reference case. So here you can see I've added a CHP unit, the 505 kilowatts electric. Here you can see I've added a CHP and a thermal store. Here you can see I've added an air source heat pump instead of a CHP, together with a thermal store. And here you can see I've added solar PV together with the air source heat pump and the store. And finally I've added a battery alongside the solar PV, the air source heat pump and thermal store. So what this enables you to do is to say, well, if I take my building or my scheme, or whatever it is, whatever energy system it is that you're modeling, in this case it's a very large leisure centre. I can take my scheme and I can then compare different scenarios of technologies, or it could be prices or whatever. I can make changes in each of these tabs and then run comparison reports. So here I could run compare cash flow, for instance, and we could see the revenues at the top here. So income, exports in the case of the CHP and the PV, and subsidies, and then our costs, gas costs and electricity costs, and all the complexity of the taxes and charges on electricity. And here you can see the bottom line, the net cash flow. So you can see this changing from our original case of costing us £864,000 to run this leisure centre in terms of gas and electricity. And then we can see how this changes with those different technologies applied. CHP actually with the thermal store giving us the best OPEX picture, but air source heat pump and the PV and battery scenario is also improving things over our reference case. So we've got investments here. So let's now look at some more financial results. So if we go to tools, we can bring this up, which is actually a spreadsheet embedded inside energyPRO. And we can set a period to look at. So we can say, let's look over 10 years. We can set a discount rate of 3.5%, which might be a typical public sector discount rate. And then we can see for our options, so we can see the investments that we're making. So going up to anything up to 1.8 million here in the case of the most complex one. And then we can see the changes in operational income. So in each case we're saving a few £100,000 a year, obviously varies between the options. And then we can see our net present value based on that discount rate. So actually the best one is the CHP with the thermal store. We can see the simple payback time, so anything between 2.5 and 8 years over here, and then also our internal rates of return and how those vary. So obviously I could go back and I could change the planning periods, look at a longer time, would change the net present value and the internal rate of return. I could also change the discount rate and see different MPVs as a result. Okay, so that was a brief dip into energyPRO and its functionality. Let's now have a look at energyCHECK. So this is a web tool. It runs energyPRO in the background on a server, and as I said earlier, this is used to monitor a system. And you can see here that it's actually pointing at a system in Denmark, in the town of Rinkeby, which is on the coast of Denmark. And there's a district heating system, as is typical in Danish towns and cities. And you can see they've got a field of solar thermal in red here. They've got an air source heat pump. Obviously, we're in May, so there's a lot of solar thermal. And the air source heat pump is operational. But the idea with this system is that you can, let's delve into a bit more detail in terms of the financial picture. You can set a budget at the beginning of the year, which here is shown in green. So for January, you can see that through each month. And then the blue is how much money you've actually made in that particular month. And then the red is how much money you could have made if you had operated the system in an ideal way. And so you can see there is scope to improve the operation of the system. Of course, it could have been because plant is out for maintenance, but it could also be that you're just not operating the plant according to the ideal scenario in terms of prices and dispatching the most economic unit at any point in time. So this is a tool we can also look at the energy, and we can see our sort of budget production from the different units. So from the gas CHP, the heat pump, and the solar thermal, and here we see what we've actually achieved, and this is the optimal picture. So that's a whirlwind tour of energyCHECK. Let's now have a look at energyTRADE. So energyTRADE again uses the underlying functionality of energyPRO, but the idea with energyTRADE is that this is about controlling a system. So this would be set up not just to read from your plant, but also to write back to the plant to make it actually achieve the simulation that you've made from your energyPRO model. So here you can see there's on this tab, there's two tabs. There's energyPRO. So the principle is you set up your model just as you would as if you were designing a scheme. But obviously this is what's really in place in another town in Denmark, where they've got a boiler, a couple of gas engines, solar thermal again, and even an electric boiler to absorb electricity when prices are negative, as they are when it's very windy, and a thermal store, and then here a prognosis of what the heat demand would be. They've actually got two different ways of predicting it in the model. So without going through the whole setup process, but you can imagine if you're setting up energyTRADE, you need to, there's quite a lot involved in that, including setting up to receive weather data, to receive electricity prices, and also to integrate with the control system on your plant. And here you can then see the simulation. Obviously, generally we don't then simulate the whole year. We would only simulate perhaps the next 5 days ahead, and it keeps, you can set it up to keep running that simulation. Typically every 5 to 15 minutes it will rerun the simulation on the basis of new data that's come in. And here you can see that we're calculating what we would like to bid in the day ahead market, and we can then actually send those bids to a trader who will then place those bids on the market. Once the bids have been secured, you can then operate your plant to achieve that bidding, the bids that you've secured. You can even trade here in the balancing market. So once you've secured your day ahead bids, and this is something that people, aggregators and like Flexitricity, for instance, in the UK, are encouraging schemes to get involved in, to use the flexibility that we have in our district heating systems and in our buildings um, to actually help balance the electricity system as we get more and more intermittent renewables on the system. So that was a brief whirlwind tour of the three products that sit in the energyPRO family: energyPRO, energyCHECK, and energyTRADE. Thanks very much for listening.